June 29th, Tuesday, 2004. We're in Rockport, Maine at Congregation
Adas Yosharon.
And I'm here with Helene Meyerowitz. And I'll start by asking you to tell me something about your family background, as far back as you can go, things that you picked up growing up, stories about grandparents, that sort of thing. I'm always curious to know, about, especially with people of Jewish heritage, where the grandparents came from and what you grew up hearing about it.
My name is Helene Joyce Meyerowitz. That is the name I go by right now. I am married, but I maintained my maiden name. I was born in the Bronx. I was born into an Orthodox home. I lived with both my parents, both my grandparents, and my brother. My grandparents were from Russia, the very western part of Russia on the border of Poland. I've tried to do research recently to find out more about them, their migration to the U.S. Could not find anything on my grandfather, other than he came here with his mother. They came through Ellis Island. She was a very sickly woman. Somehow he managed to smuggle her through the line, and they settled in the Lower East Side. My grandmother, I did manage to find her manifest on Ellis Island, left from Potsdam, I believe, on the Rotterdam. And she, too, settled in the Lower East Side, and that was how they met. My parents were educated up until, my mother did not graduate from high school. My father left, early in junior high school. They were working people, very, very hard working people. My father was a New York City bus driver, and he drove the bus until he retired. My mother just worked her way up in various jobs to a management situation. Back then in the 60s, there was a company called Barton's, which was a chocolate concern, and it was Jewishly owned. They valued education. They valued education very, very much. I struggled through school, but I was encouraged to continue. So I did. I graduated and became a teacher. That's what women did. My brother struggled, and he became a dentist. That's what boys did. So according to my parents, their children were very, very successful. When I graduated from college, I did get married. I, however, married a boy who was not Jewish. Backtrack a moment. Actually, he was Jewish. His natural mother was Jewish, but his father was Irish Catholic. His parents divorced when he was an infant, and he was raised by his father and grandmother, who were Catholic. Miraculously enough, we were married by a rabbi who was his cousin. It was a Reformed ceremony, which thrilled my parents to no end. He was not accepted by my parents. My parents, of course, wanted to see their daughter marry a Jewish lawyer, Jewish doctor, whatever. I kind of broke the mold, was the black sheep for a while. We proceeded to get married, and we had a son, David. I was married in 1964, soon after graduating from Hunter College. In the summer of 72, we moved ourselves to Presque Isle, Maine. Very rural part of the country, 12, 13-hour drive up an interstate that had one lane north and one lane south, going through potato country. And we settled in a little community called Presque Isle. Talk about minority. It wasn't really a synagogue, but it was a building that they considered a Jewish center. It was not open all year long. there were not enough Jews to warrant that happening. But there were a few of us. And came the whole high holy days in September. They flew a rabbi up to Presque Isle, so we did have services. A few of us Jewish women got together, and we had a group. We had a now group. Back then, now was very in. Yes, I do remember. I don't think about it very often. It was Passover, and our friend who worked at the mental health center with my husband at the time, his wife was an Episcopal or Presbyterian minister, and she wanted to have a Seder to kind of educate her community. And Presque Isle was not known for having any ethnic food readily available, so I volunteered to make matzah.
From scratch.
From scratch.
Just like
all I did was mix whatever I had to mix, flour and water, and came out with some sort of discombobulated form of a cracker, and that was our matzah. We could have had it if somebody had thought ahead to order it from Bangor. Bangor was a 3-hour trip south of Presque Isle, and they would order ethnic food. But nobody thought of doing that, so we did have a Seder with Helene's homegrown matzah. As I said, there was no real Jewish community other than I knew a few Jewish people, and we would get together. I do remember one time my son David, when he was in school, he was very young. Back in Maine back then, they didn't celebrate, but I forget the word. We had a day called Temperance Day, and all the children had to attend a lecture. These women from the Temperance League would come in and talk about the evils of alcohol, basically the evils of overindulging in tobacco and alcohol and whatever. And David came home very upset because he knew at Passover at the Seder, everybody drank wine. So I had to start explaining to him that, it's okay, kind of thing. And, he was perhaps maybe one of 3 Jewish children in the entire school system. I was perhaps one of 2 or 3 Jewish teachers in the entire school system. So
When you say the school system, you mean that town?
That town, yes.
A wider area.
That town. Now that town included 2 other small towns with it. It was SAD 1. In Maine, we have school administrative districts, and that was a school administrative district, which included 3 or 4 towns. So yes, I was one of maybe 2 or 3 Jewish teachers, and he was a minority there too. Wound up in 1976 divorcing. My husband's name was Paul. We divorced, and I stayed in Presque Isle perhaps 4 years and decided this is not really where I wanted to be. And David remained with his father. I had lots of growing up to do, and so I detoured to Colorado. That didn't work out, and so I drove back to Maine, and I settled in Portland. Now Portland has a large Jewish community, but I didn't think of joining anything at the time. I was too involved in whatever craziness I was going through, and was looking for a job and managed to find a job here in the Mid-Coast, except I moved to Warren, Maine. In Warren, I lived in an apartment over a general store. And it was hard to tell my parents, having come from my Jewish background in the city, that I'm living over a grocery store in Maine. But managed to do it, and they did eventually come and visit. I should backtrack to my growing up days in the Bronx. I lived on Morris Avenue, which is the West Bronx, which was maybe 6 or 7 blocks from the Grand Concourse, which back then in the 50s and 60s was grand, very grand.
That's not anywhere near Morris Park Avenue, is it?
No,
Oh,
that's
okay.
that's the East Bronx.
Okay.
I went to Taft High School, and I lived a very sheltered life. I walked to high school. When it came to going to college, I took the bus or I took the train. My mother wanted me to go to an out-of-town college, but I didn't want to be a burden on my parents because I knew they were putting my brother through dental school. So I was the good little girl, and I went to a city school. But as I said, very, very sheltered. I was very backward, but I managed to meet my husband in Hunter College. That led to us getting married.
Did you have, sort of simultaneous with your public schooling, did you attend a Hebrew school? I mean, did you have any kind of...
My mother wanted me to, and that's my one big regret in life, that I did not go. I had a girlfriend, a very close friend, who did go. I do regret it to this day, yes. A few years ago, this synagogue offers Hebrew classes to anybody who wants to take it, and I did. For 1 year, I took Hebrew lessons, and I enjoyed it. But somehow my life got a little more hectic, and I couldn't continue. But I do regret it. Yeah.
What was, aside from that, what was the, your parents were Orthodox, what was the sort of the everyday practice of Judaism in your household?
My grandmother would light the candles on Friday night. My grandmother and my grandfather would not turn on the lights on Saturday. My grandmother would not cook on Saturday. My father would not smoke on Saturday. Came the holy days, my father and grandfathers would go to shul. The shul was at the very end of the block, so they would just walk. It was an Orthodox shul, and the women had to sit in the back or the women and the men were separated. I didn't attend the shul very often. Why? I don't know. My mother didn't go, but my grandfather and father and brother went. The men went for some reason. But Passover, we had seders, large family would come. Both my grandfathers would sit at the head of the table, and they would drink Schlivovitz. I remember that. And I managed to save the little wine glasses. I still have held on to that. Eventually, I became the youngest one at the Seder, and so I would have to say the 4 questions. And then when I got married and had David, he became the youngest, and so he would have to say the 4 questions. They were very happy growing up days, from what I remember. My brother's bar mitzvah was a great, grand event. My mother and grandmother would empty out. I lived in a 5-room apartment. It was 3 bedrooms, living room, and a kitchen. Miraculously enough, they would empty out the entire apartment, and we'd have, 50 to 75 people come in, and they would make all the food. And that was a grand event for my brother's bar mitzvah. I remember that. And my engagement party took place there, and my Sweet 16 took place there. So those were very fond memories. I was saying this yesterday to the doctor. I was brought up in an Orthodox home, so we didn't drink milk when we had our meat meals. So I guess consequently, when I grew up to be an adult, milk was not a large part of my diet when I'd go eat a hamburger. And so that's why I have now osteopenia from the lack of calcium. So I guess the Orthodox, diet has its its pros and cons.
Thought about that, right.
Yeah, has its pros and cons. But I was brought up on lox and bagels, and you were mentioning before the similarities between natives and Jews. I am now married to a Native American. I went from Irish Catholic to Native American. And we do often look at some of the similarities. Yes, brought up with lox. He was brought up in a reserve in New Brunswick in northern Canada, where they're on the Miramichi River, which is where the best salmon comes from. Mm-hmm. So he was raised on salmon, real salmon, and I was raised on lox, smoked salmon. He also was raised on salt herring. I was raised on pickled herring. One of his relatives, or his grandmother's last name, was Caplan. They pronounced it Capelin. My grandparents' name was Kaplan, Kaplan. And we just, more and more talk about the similarities. My grandparents coming from Russia, that was a very cold environment, as is New Brunswick. Yeah. And so, and both being nomadic. My husband's name now is George, and he left the reserve at 17 and has traveled the world. Once I got married, I guess I left the nest in the Bronx and became nomadic as well. And so whatever similarities you want to put to that.
If you want to get really adventurous with your parallels, you may have heard, I guess, early 1800s in New England in particular, there was a very popular belief, sort of what we call pseudo-scientific argument that the Jews, or that the Native Americans were a lost tribe of Jews. And there was all kinds of literature and, articles published about, that's why their noses look like that, and, the resemblances between Hebrew and native tongues, and, we laugh about it now.
Well, George and I do. We do laugh about it. Yes, yeah. It just, we're both far from where we started out, and we've been and we've come back. So, I could really understand that. Again, miraculously enough, George being a Micmac, Native American, we were married in a Jewish ceremony. We found a rabbi from Portland who would perform mixed marriage ceremonies. His name was Rabbi David Sandmel, and we were married right here in Rockland. We were married at the Samoset, which is one of the largest resorts in Maine. Mm-hmm. And we were married. They have a little chapel. It's right off the golf course. My mother had made a bedspread that could be used as the chuppah. So we built the chuppah, and the rabbi came up, and as I said, we had a reformed ceremony. George being a recovering alcoholic, we did not partake in wine, but we had white grape juice for the ceremony, which was neat. George wore a yarmulke, and it was great. I mean, I don't know how many Jewish women wind up marrying out of their religion, but both ceremonies, as I said, were religious ceremonies, and it was kind of neat.
Did the ceremony, I'm curious to know, did the ceremony incorporate anything from his?
No, we did not. Yeah. No, we decided.
Too much?
Yeah, we decided to just do it my way, kind of thing. But he does, for friends and family, perform spiritual ceremonies from his native heritage. I've learned from George spirituality, which I don't think I ever had. I also don't have a strong religious background, not having gone to Hebrew school. So whatever I know about my religion is basically the culture and the rituals. They were very strong in my growing up. Hanukkah, we always lit the menorah, and we had latkes and whatever else came along with it. I did take the tradition of latkes with me when I started teaching. Being a minority in Presque Isle, Maine, came December and they did Christmas stuff. I would come in and do Hanukkah stuff, and I introduced latkes to the children, and we would make it together. And it was very unusual. One or two children wouldn't like it. And I'd say, gee, they're just like hash brown potatoes, and we're living in potato country.
Right.
But most of them enjoyed it, and they were fascinated by learning about the ceremony of the candles and playing with the dreidel. And I proceeded to take that with me when I worked in the Mid-Coast here, to the point that when I retired in 2000, they would ask me back on a yearly basis to come and cook latkes for them. That has since ended, but they certainly know about Hanukkah. And I've introduced matzah to many children who had no idea what that was all about.
Not necessarily the home.
Definitely not the home version, the boxed version. And as long as I put peanut butter on it or butter, they loved it to death. So I've done that much, as far as promoting that culture, which ordinarily these children really know nothing about. They live in these little cocooned towns, and their life is just their life, and very little practical experience as to what there is in the outside world. And so that's been a learning experience for me as well. Presently, I am living in Canada right now. Could be temporary, could be permanent. I am living on George's Reserve in New Brunswick, Canada, while George is renovating our house. As far as I know, there could be a synagogue. If there is, it would be in Fredericton, which is 2 hours south of where I am. I looked in the phone book and there's nothing. My name, when I when I spell it, people are, they chuckle. It's not a very common name, and there are very few Jews, but they are the merchants. If there are Jews in these rural pockets, they are most of the time the merchants. I haven't met any yet. That's yet to come.
I'll ask you about this. I had read, I can't remember where, that at one time, like the turn of the century or something like that, all right, this is what I read, that the largest potato growers in Aroostook County included among them several Jewish families. Did you ever run across, when you were living up there?
Not as the farmers, no. By the time I got up there in 72, they were not farmers. There was a car dealer, Etzkovitz, who had 2 or 3 businesses, but the farmers were not by the time I got up there. No. Most of the Jews that I met in Presque Isle were imports. They were from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York. Except, as I said, the Etzkovitz migrated from somewhere, but they had several generations there. Yeah. I decided to join the synagogue several years ago simply because I wanted to get back to my roots. For some reason, there was a synagogue, and I felt that I needed to attach myself. I really don't know why. I just felt that not that I go to synagogue every week. I don't. I never did. but I just felt that I wanted to help maintain this Jewish community, that I felt it was something that I needed to do. I have been welcomed into the community. They love George because he's different and he brings he brings something unique to the synagogue. And that's where I am today.
Oh yeah, why did you move to that corner of Maine in the first place? Why did you leave?
Oh yes. Being married at the time, my husband worked in Jamaica Plains, and he was the token white person, and they were starting to have some problems, violence, and vandalism, and Paul thought it was time for us to maybe look elsewhere. And like you said before, it was a chance for a young family to move to rural America where it was safer. So we opened up the New York Sunday Times, and there was this little rural mental health center in Fort Fairfield, which was even 13 miles more north than Presque Isle. And just on a fluke, Paul sent a resume, and they must have called him within 48 hours, come up. That's how we wound up there. Yeah. And we bought a house, and, David could play in the driveway, and, he could just grow up without some of the city problems.
Did you live in town or outside of town?
We lived in town.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. He was able to walk to school. I didn't drive. When I lived in New York City, as I said, I had a very sheltered growing up. I didn't learn how to drive. My father wanted to teach me desperately, of course, being a bus driver. And my joke is all I had to know how to do was buy a token, and then I could go anywhere I wanted. Learning to drive was very difficult for me. I tried in New York City and was not successful, and I moved up to northern Maine, and here I was very isolated. I took my shopping cart with me because that's how I would go shopping. Took me several tries, but I did finally succeed, and I did learn how to drive. But before that, I would walk to the schools. I did some substitute teaching so that they would get to know who I am. And once they knew who I was able to get a job up there. By 76, I was driving. And it was a whole total new world for me to have gained that bit of independence, which I had not experienced before. And that's what brought us up to Aroostook County, a job for Paul. And when I lived in Presque Isle, I really didn't have an identity of my own. I somehow was never proud of my name. Meyerowitz was always a strange name. And my first married name was Sheridan, so I was Helene Sheridan. But I was always Paul's wife, or I was David's mother, or I was Mrs. Sheridan when I was teaching. Somehow it was very important for me when I got divorced in 76, I always say it was my year of independence, that I needed to get back my name, and I needed to become comfortable with my name, which was unique simply because I was outside of the urban environment. And it was a learning for me to finally become independent and live with my heritage. And now it's great. It's just unique. And when I have to give my name to someone, it's always leave enough room, and I spell my name, and then they go, thank you, I'm glad you told me that kind of thing. So it's something I have learned to live and be comfortable in my own skin. Yeah.
Now, you have the one son.
Yes.
You mentioned, and I think you said you said something about when you were raising him in Presque Isle, he was one of one or two other Jewish kids. What sense at that time did he have, or did you impart to him of his heritage? I always said to David he had the best
of both worlds. When it came December, he always got Christmas from Paul's side of the family, and he always got Hanukkah from my side of the family. So he knew there were definitely two different religions, although we didn't raise him in a religious household, other than he knew the rituals. We did the Hanukkah rituals and we did the Passover rituals. Never had a Christmas tree, but yet he would get Christmas presents from Paul's side of the family. Unfortunately, David was not bar mitzvahed, and that's another regret I have. I felt guilty, and Jewish mothers, live with guilt, that I needed to grow up so that when I left David with his father, there was a lot lacking as far as the Jewish culture still being, given to him. And it came at one point, I don't know, he was in high school perhaps, that we sat down and we talked about religion, and he said, well, Mom, I have decided to become Jewish. And it's like, whoa. It's something I had always wanted, but felt, I really can't insist on anything, David, because, that's how it was, your father and me. So that thrilled me, really. When I lived in Colorado for a short time, I remember going everywhere shopping for a mezuzah for him for one of his birthdays, and finally succeeding at sending him one, and that was just a thrill for him. He was very aware that he had a Jewish heritage. I think that was a little stronger than even the Irish Catholic background that his father had. But he was aware of it. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he chose to grow up Jewish was just a thrill.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier, at some point when you were living, I guess, in this region of Maine, although maybe it hadn't before, I'm really interested in the prospect or the image of your parents visiting up here. I mean, because I just can't imagine that wouldn't be a total culture shock. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that was like or has been.
The first experience they had, well, actually, they did come and visit us in Presque Isle. They knew it was a small town, and it was a long drive for them. I think they were just focusing more on the fact that I was settled in, and they now had a grandson to focus on. It was, I think they saw what they expected to see, because I had really told them everything. Mm-hmm. I was more stressed out when they came for my wedding, my second marriage in 1986, living over a grocery store. I was so stressed out that I had to take a week off from school. I had developed a psychosomatic neck condition because my family, not only my parents, but my brother was coming up with his wife and 2 children or whatever. That stressed me out because at that point I was saying, how much of a success have I really been if I'm living in an apartment over a grocery store? I was rather down on myself because I always looked at success in the Jewish term as the money symbol. And if I didn't have a lot of money, then how successful could I really have been? And always compared myself with my brother, who was a very successful dentist and had this huge home in Tarrytown and whatever. That stressed me out. And that was more self-imposed than anything. They just wanted to see me happy at that point. And they could see that I was a lot happier going into my second marriage. But yeah, it was a surprise for them. But I had prepared them. Yeah. And
I wonder, on the other side of the coin of the sort of, you mentioned, kids growing up in towns in Maine might have a sense of, being cocooned and all that. But I can't imagine that on the other side of that, I'm sure that you also see there's some quality in small town New England life. Otherwise, you wouldn't still be here.
You talk
about that a little bit.
You just said it. It was a big trade-off. After many years of being in Maine, I realized that, hey, I like it here. I like the friendliness. Yes, I'm unique, but it's the uniqueness that people come to want to know more about. I have a very close group of friends, and I am the only Jewish woman in many groups that I belong to, and they find my background rather unique, and I find comfort in that they enjoy learning about it, and it's a very satisfying way of life. I have come to enjoy it very much. I don't miss the excitement of the city. I don't miss the vast choices that I had when I was in the city. Although I go back once or twice a year, I love to be in the middle of it, but I love to get away from it. Mm-hmm. And it's strange to me now. George has a nephew who's living right smack in Manhattan, right on Amsterdam Avenue, and he's managing the Hostel International. And he loves it. He's just thrilled to be right in the middle of Manhattan. It's like he's the Indian who settled in New York, and I'm the Jew who's on the reserve. So it's funny. But we visit him as often as we can. But I love it here.
Was well, not necessarily the original attraction, but have you enjoyed over the years, sort of an outdoor? Are there outdoor things that?
That has not changed for me. I have never been an outdoor person, and I just joke about it. I lived in northern Maine. The house had to have a fireplace. Why, I don't know, but we managed to buy a house with a fireplace so that we could sit in front of the fireplace in the winter. I tried cross-country skiing. Didn't work out. I tried, actually, that was it. I tried cross-country skiing, and it wasn't for me. The first winter was a bad winter snow-wise. For the first time in many years, we had snow. I couldn't look out of my living room windows. I was never an outdoor person, and I still am not an outdoor person, but the past few years I have come to just love gardening. And that was a thrill for me, because coming from Cement City, as I say, had no experience with planting anything, and now I have 2 acres of yard.
So how did you learn?
I just did it. I bought whatever plant I bought. I dug the hole. I put in the fertilizer. I put in the plant or the seed. My biggest thrill was my first spring with tulips coming up. That
you put in the fall. Or
exactly. That was the biggest thrill that I experienced, my outdoor experience. That has given me so much satisfaction. The weeding is great. It's a great pastime. But seeing the flowers come up, having my garden for the first time was another thrill. To be able to pick that tomato and eat it right out of the garden rather than going to the supermarket and buying it. So that's about the really only outdoor activity
that's a significant one.
For me it was, yeah. Other than that, I am not athletic. Yet my husband's a Native American and he's an outdoorsman, to the nth degree. Although he doesn't do a lot of outdoor stuff, he has done it and he knows how. But I'm an indoor person, and I enjoy a lot of indoor things. Yeah, but gardening has really been great for me.
I guess maybe you could talk just a little bit about this community here, this synagogue, and you mentioned why you got involved to begin with, but what, over the years, what's your involvement been, and talk a little bit about that.
Haven't had a lot of involvement other than I have participated in the soup kitchen. They do a soup kitchen the first Sunday of every month. It's done out of the Episcopal Church. It's an interfaith soup kitchen, and the synagogue does, as I said, the first Sunday. I have participated in that. The synagogue has a Seder every year. I have attended the Seder. I have brought some food for the Seder. They have Friday night services, which I have come to on occasion, and I have provided a dessert or two afterward. I come on the high holy days. Now, since my mom and dad are gone, I come for Kaddish.
You could do that too.
Right? I support them in whatever way I can, basically. It's a friendly community. This synagogue takes in congregants from Damariscotta, no, probably a little further south, to Belfast. So it's about a 50-mile radius. So it's about 104 families. They do not necessarily come from Rockland, but they come from that span, Damariscotta to Belfast. Young families, elderly. It's a nice mix of congregants. As I said, there's a small core that have been born and bred here in Rockland. Many others, such as myself, have come from other areas.
And are these people, I mean, this is just your impression, are these people who come from other areas, are they professionals, business people?
Oh, yes, yes. I often, this congregation is well endowed. Several physicians, we have dentists, we have lawyers, we have teachers. So it's a well endowed community, and they support the synagogue just very well. They contribute to the upkeep, to the to whatever the synagogue needs to do to promote the culture. They do contribute financially to the town of Rockland. They maintain very positive relations with the town. Yeah. I love coming to services. I love the choir. They have a just superb choir. I would recommend coming in September just to hear them. Yeah, they are just spectacular.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd care to add? Or?
I don't know. I can't think.
Yeah.
Other than I didn't know, how much of a rural Jew I am, simply because my blood is so strong from the urban upbringing that I've had. But I do know that once I left the city, I became a unique entity wherever I had been, and that continues to be. Yeah.
Very good. Thanks very much.